Good evening, everybody. And it is Malachowski, but that is a mouthful of a name to say. I almost didn't marry my husband because of that. I was like, man, I really like you, but with a name like that, I'm not so sure. Luckily, I was a smart woman, and that actually worked out, and I married the guy. But anyways, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. A special thanks to General Metcalf, everybody here at the Air Force Museum for the wonderful invitation, and to my great friends, General and Mrs. Cooper, just for your friendship and for your passion for this place, which is palpable and is contagious. And so it's nice to finally be here at this mecca, if you will, this monument to aviation and everything that's good in the Air Force. So thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Dawn Lazarine, who for 2 years has been trying to coordinate my Air Force schedule to get out here today. And she has been absolutely indefatigable. And I appreciate that, Dawn. So thank you. More importantly, I'm just really honored to be here today at the Air Force Museum. This is the keeper of our Air Force stories. And I'm here to talk about just one story. And there are hundreds of thousands of airmen in our Air Force today, and there have been millions over the history of our Air Force, and each one of them has a story. And I don't believe that any of those stories are any more important or less important than somebody else's. I just have a distinct privilege to be here today to share my one story. But I hope what you keep in mind is that it's just one story, and that I wish you could hear the story of all of our airmen, past and present, because you truly come to understand all that is great, I think, about our Air Force. But you already know that because you're fans of the Air Force and you're here at the Air Force Museum. So I'm just here and proud to represent our current airmen, and especially to put maybe a visible face on some of the contributions that women are making in today's Air Force. So I was thinking, well, what am I going to talk about? Well, I want to talk about the history of women in military aviation. I started looking into that. I'm like, man, I would need like a week-long seminar to do that. And then I thought, well, I'll talk about the history of just women in Air Force aviation, cut out maybe the Navy and the Army. And I'm like, that's not necessarily right, especially if we want to talk a little bit about women Air Force service pilots, because that was Army Air Force's days and Army Air Corps days and, before our Air Force was founded. So maybe that's not right. And I was getting really frustrated, and I leaned on my wonderful husband, whose last name is Malachowski, and I said, hey, what do you think I should do? He goes, well, why don't you just tell it through your eyes? People want to hear your life story, how you evolved and got where you are today, and share the history of women in military aviation through that. And so today, that's what I plan on doing. I only speak for myself when I say that I have a hard time whenever I bring up the fact that people say I'm a woman fighter pilot, or that I'm a woman Thunderbird pilot, because to me the term woman, I hope it's obvious, first of all, but second of all, it really doesn't do anything to talk about my character as an officer, or my skill as a fighter pilot, or my contributions as a Thunderbird. I am an officer, a pilot, and I'm just proud to be an airman. So when I get asked to talk about women's contributions, sometimes I just get a little closed up about it, but I'll walk you through how I learned the importance of understanding being a woman and what this legacy is, in this great Air Force. And so, with that said, I guess I want to share my story, my timeline, along with all of the other women who are sitting here in this audience today. I know we've got active duty and reserve and guard in the audience, and a lot of veterans, so thanks to all of you. So with the fact that we're going to talk about women aviators, I'd like to say that no male pilots were harmed in the creation of this presentation. And by no means am I trying to say that women pilots should be separate or anything. We walk hand in hand, we train hand in hand, we go into harm's way hand in hand, right next to our brothers in arms, and we're very, very proud to do so. We've been proud to do it since World War II, and we're proud to do it today. All right, so this is just to highlight a little bit about that. So I'm going to talk about it for about an hour is what they said. I'll try not to do that much, but more importantly, after you listen to me, I really hope you guys have some good questions, because that's where a lot of the great information comes from. So I look forward to hearing from you and hearing your story once this comes to an end. One of the greatest things I had the opportunity to do in my career is dedicate the Air Force Memorial in October of 2006. The Air Force didn't get its own memorial there in D.C. until 2006, and to be on that Thunderbird team was certainly really quite special. I live just a few blocks from this monument, and it's something that I get to see every day when I go to work in Washington, D.C., and it makes me really proud. A lot of people think different things about the three spires. There's people that say it talks about our three core values, right? Integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. I like to think of it as on a personal note, as what I call TLC. I am a product. Let me go back. I have had an amazing Air Force career. The Air Force has been so good to me. The opportunities that I've been given to go into combat, to lead peers in combat, to fly as a Thunderbird and be a White House Fellow is all because of the United States Air Force. It is an amazing organization. But I also realize that I'm not the only person that could have been the first woman Thunderbird pilot or the first person, to lead over Iraq on Election Day. It's all TLC, timing, luck, and circumstance. And I think I'm a product of TLC. And when I look at those spires, that's kind of what I think, timing, luck, and circumstance. And a lot of people like to look at it and see it as past, present, and future. And I think that's a pretty amazing thing, too. And there's a quote up there. I was talking to a really wise man the other day, and I said, what am I supposed to say? We were talking about legacies and leaving a legacy personally to your family or leaving a legacy professionally. And I was talking about a specific woman, and I said, how am I supposed to feel about her contribution or what she did? And we'll get to details later. And he said, all you need to know is if she had not been, you would not be. And I started thinking about that in context of legacies in my personal life, but also my professional life here in the Air Force. All of the things I have been able to do have been because of women who've come before me, because of vanguards and trailblazers who've paved the way. And each step along the way, there's those of us that add our skill set and our contributions. And people talk about, wow, it's full circle. We had women flying in World War II, and now we've had a woman Thunderbird pilot. And to me, a circle kind of comes to an end. To me, it's just a continuum. If she had not been, you would not be. And today we're very lucky to have one of these, I'll put two pictures up here, but one of these lovely ladies, I believe, is in the front row today. I would love to, if you could stand up, my personal heroine, of course, in the front row, Miss Nadine Nagel. Not only is she a woman Air Force service pilot and a pilot there during World War II, but she's also someone who rightfully earned the Congressional Gold Medal. So we are amongst greatness here today. And Miss Frances Brookings was going to join us this evening, but she sends her regrets, but I also wanted to put her beautiful picture up there. I find it interesting, the patch in the middle is the WASP mascot. Her name is Fifi Nella, and she was drawn by Walt Disney during World War II specifically for these women aviators, America's first women military aviators. And it's ironic because my call sign that I was given back in 1998 is actually Fifi. The fact is, it has nothing to do with Fifi Nella, truthfully. The guys gave it to me to be kind of funny because I was the girl in their squadron. But I'll tell you something. There's some sweet serendipity of the fact that my call sign is Fifi, and I'm very honored to have that. So where does my story start, and how do we come full circle on this? That's me. I was born in 1974. Looking at that young gal, I don't know that anyone would think she'd grow up and be a combat fighter pilot, or that she'd be a Thunderbird or a White House Fellow, or that's the gal that's standing in front of you today. And it's ironic because that was the very first year that the military started allowing women into pilot training. And the Army and the Navy actually led the way. And those two ladies up there, Barbara Allen Rainey and Sally Murphy, were the first women to actually get their wings in the United States military. Of course, much to my chagrin, it wouldn't be until 1977, 3 years later, when I was 3. You can see the shock on my face. It would be 1977 that the Air Force would have its first women enter pilot training, and there were actually 10 women that went through that together, strength in numbers, of course, in that first class. At the time, women were still could only fly support-type aircraft, so tankers, transport, and, of course, the trainers. You have the T-37 in the bottom left-hand corner, and then, of course, the T-38. I was walking around the museum today with General Metcalf and talking to General Cooper, and I was like, wow, there's a T-37 hanging in there, and I realized, I guess I'm getting old because that plane's retired now. So an aircraft I flew is actually retired. But those women were good enough to train the men. They were good enough to be their instructors. They were good enough to generate pilots of the highest quality to go out there and fill those fighter cockpits. It took also in 1977 was an amazing step for the WASP, because the WASP had been unceremoniously disbanded following World War II. And it was in 1977 that finally Congress recognized them and gave them veteran status. When that was signed into law in 1977, when I'm this old, the WASP were not invited to the signing ceremony, which just blows my mind. We'll talk about that a little bit more, and I will do something to fix that as we get here in the future. But this is happening when I'm 3 years old. When I was 5 years old, Olivia Newton-John was awesome, and I liked her short haircut, so I took the Olivia Newton-John record to the store and had them cut my hair just like her. But young people in the audience probably don't even know who Olivia Newton-John is. So I came from a middle-class family. Both my grandfathers were career Navy. My father had served briefly in the United States Army. We were a patriotic, middle-class American family, and we would go to the Veterans Day parades and the 4th of July, and so we went to air shows. And I went there, and I saw this beautiful plane flying called the F-4 Phantom. And I always tell my husband he has to realize that the F-4 was actually my first love, because it was fast and it flew low, and when it came by, you could smell the jet fuel, you could see it, you could hear it, you could feel it as it shook in your chest. There is nothing more beautiful, in my opinion, than a flying F-4 Phantom. I fell in love with it that day, and I remember telling my dad, when I grow up, I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And my dad looked down at me and he said, "You're going to be a great fighter pilot." Little did I know that in 1979, that was completely illegal, and there were no women fighter pilots at the time. But, I was 5, so I figured I could make my dream come true. So I stayed focused on those things. As I got older, this is me when I'm 12. I apologize for holding a Navy F-18. But this was the type of gifts and stuff that I would get for Christmas, which was, I guess, a little bit unusual for a young gal back in 1986. And I kept staying focused on my goals. And in the 80s, of course, we had Panama and Grenada and those invasions there. And women were integral parts to those different operations, obviously flying tanker and transport aircraft. All of this was going on while I was still trying to just, put my posters up and dream of the day that I would fly. And I was in 6th grade, and in my class, I had a teacher who shall remain. No, he's a great man, I'm sure, but at the time I was a little disappointed. Every Friday, one of us would stand up, and we would have to say what we wanted to be when we grew up, and then we'd have to give a discussion on how we were going to get there. So, I'm a couple months into the school year. I stand up. I said, my name's Nicole Ellingwood, and I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And the teacher stopped me. And he said, "Sit down and come back next week when you have something more realistic." And all of the kids started laughing and making fun of me. This was in 1986, and of course I cried and I ran home. I remember telling my dad, and all I remember is that my dad immediately got in the car and he left. And I don't know to this day necessarily where he went, but I think he may have had a conversation with my teacher. And so I was depressed and saddened, because that's the year that I discovered women couldn't be fighter pilots. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And so my parents, being awesome parents, decided to take our family on a trip to Washington, D.C. to go to the National Air and Space Museum. And that was just like a kid in a candy store. I'm running all over the place. And in this far, dark corner, this really itty-bitty small display, which, Nadine, I still tell them that this display is way too small. They have information on the WASP, the Women Air Force Service Pilots from World War II. Now, who in here has not heard of the WASP? That's good. This is a good audience, so I'll spare the whole history and the whole story there. But, we had over 1,000 women who answered their country's call. They went through the same training. They wore military uniforms, lived on a military base, but were not afforded officer status. They were not afforded the same rank, the same pay, any of that. They were good enough, obviously, to train the men for combat, but at the time, obviously, it wasn't culturally acceptable, to let women go into combat. With that said, these WASP flew everything. They flew all of the trainers and support aircraft. They flew fighters, bombers, P-51s, B-24s, you name it. People always say to me, "Are you strong enough to fly that F-16?" And I laugh because it's fly-by-wire. I didn't have to take a B-24, and do this like these ladies did, back in World War II. 38 of those patriots gave their lives in service to their country. They were not allowed to have flags over their coffins when they were buried. And in fact, the girls in the class would have to pool their money to ship the bodies home in piedwood coffins. They were instructor pilots. They were test pilots. They ferried aircraft. They did it all. My favorite is they towed targets. I mean, who in their right mind would volunteer to tow targets? That is courageous stuff. So they tow this banner behind their plane. They let the gentlemen who were going to be fighter pilots come up and, shoot at them. I was like, wow, I mean, I've been shot at, but not voluntarily, you know. So they were unceremoniously disbanded, unfortunately. The battle would rage on for veteran status and recognition. And again, like I said, in 1977, they were recognized, but again, unceremoniously. President Carter did not invite them to the White House at the time. But the point being here is I'm 12 years old, and I'm like, well, of course I can be a fighter pilot. These women were flying P-51s. So it reinvigorated my hope. I knew that maybe in my 12-year-old mind I didn't understand Congress and the law, but I knew women had done it before, so I knew that I could do it too. And so the WASP have been with me and their legacy and all of the trails that they've blazed for me since day one. And that's really the point that I'm trying to make here. I stay focused. I go off to high school. I'm a part of Air Force Junior ROTC and Civil Air Patrol. I'm a huge fan of Air Force Junior ROTC, and I love the Civil Air Patrol. I cannot recommend two organizations, especially the Civil Air Patrol, more highly to young people these days. If you know any young people that are interested in aviation, interested in serving their country in a patriotic way, learning more about discipline and self-confidence and teamwork, these are the organizations for you. The Civil Air Patrol actually afforded me a scholarship when I was a sophomore in high school that paid for my flying lessons. And so I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I would take off out of North Las Vegas Airport, paid for by the Civil Air Patrol when I was just a kid. And that's actually me on my 16th birthday, which is the age you have to be, soloing my first aircraft. I remember flying out of North Las Vegas Airport just down the street from Nellis Air Force Base, where the F-4 Phantom was flying, where the Thunderbirds would practice, every Monday and Tuesday, and I would watch them. I never thought about being a Thunderbird, but I did think about that F-4. And it's amazing that I would come back home so many years later as a Thunderbird and fly right over the same field, where I had my first solo as a 16-year-old girl. I point out this gal here because she was integral to me staying focused at this time. That's us when we're about 15, Kim Campbell. She goes by Casey. We've known each other since we were 12. We used to run around and tell people in the Civil Air Patrol, because we were in CAP together, we're going to be fighter pilots when we grow up. And people would just laugh at us, and the guys would chuckle, and some of the adult instructors were like, well, if they'd let you, you'd probably be a good one, but you're probably, just going to have to fly something else, which was fine. Of course, we'll fly whatever they'll let us. But she was important to me because it was nice to have another gal that thought like me. And we're going to hear a little bit more about Kim Campbell later on, but she's been my friend for 23 years, yeah. So I headed off to United States Air Force Academy, wonderful and marvelous education, had a fabulous time there. I got myself involved in the glider program. People ask a lot, I want to learn to fly, or I don't have a lot of money, or can't afford, big powered engine lessons. I say go for gliders. I think if you can be a great glider pilot, I think you can fly absolutely anything well. If you can learn to fly by the seat of your pants and you can understand energy management and you can fly a coordinated turn with rudder and the yaw string stays straight in your windshield, you can absolutely fly an F-16 or an F-15. People think I'm crazy, but you have to trust me. If you can fly a glider well, I really think that you can fly anything well. And I guess Captain Sully Sullenberger kind of proved that also. But while I'm there at the Academy, in 1992, 91-92, there was a battle raging in Congress. And that battle was following Desert Storm, whether or not women, the combat exclusion law should be lifted on women flying fighter aircraft. And lo and behold, you have all these people fighting for or against women becoming fighter pilots. I'm watching this, of course, with bated breath as a young, aspiring second lieutenant and aspiring Air Force pilot. Because I remember I would walk around, I'd be like, I'd be a fighter pilot if they let me. By this time, the F-4 Phantom had been retired, And so I said, well, I'll fly the F-15E Strike Eagle because that was its replacement. So I had all this F-15E Strike Eagle stuff up in my cadet room. I said, I'm going to fly the F-15E Strike Eagle if they let me, but they won't, so I want to fly the KC-10 because I want to be able to drag the fighters into combat because fighter pilots can't do anything without tanker pilots, which is true. And so that was my goal, and I walked around probably a little bit cocky, and then all of a sudden there was this day on the terrazzo. It was my sophomore year, and they made an announcement over the big loudspeaker. I'll never forget it because it was a cold day, and I was walking by myself, and you listen, they say, attention in the area, attention in the area. And you're like, yeah, you hear that all the time. But they announced that Congress had lifted the ban on women flying fighter aircraft. And you would think I was totally excited, but I was absolutely petrified because I realized I had been talking smack since I was like 5 years old. And you have to go to pilot training, finish that. You got to finish kind of high. I'm like, then you got to make it through fighter school. And all of a sudden it hit me that, man, oh man, I hope I can do this. My friends come running over to my room. They're like, Nicole, they lifted the ban. You're going to be able to fly your Strike Eagle. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I hope I just get a pilot slot. One of the coolest things happened my junior year. Jeannie Talley Flynn up there in the upper left-hand corner, she was America's first combat fighter pilot. Ironically, she flew the F-15E Strike Eagle, which was my dream plane. She was a first lieutenant. The Air Force, were sending her around kind of on their education/media tour, to say, hey, this is the new way we're going. Here's our first woman combat fighter pilot, and that's that. And she's a phenomenal human being. And she was coming. She was going to have this panel with cadets. And, I got to sign up and get in one of the lectures with her, and I had this picture of a Strike Eagle I was going to have her sign and all this stuff. And lo and behold, I got mono. And so I was totally, mono went around like crazy at the Air Force Academy. So I was locked down, and I missed Jeannie Talley Flynn. Several years, not many, a few years after that, I would be flying on her wing in an F-15E Strike Eagle. So I got to get my autographs and made up for it, and her and I are having dinner next weekend. So I'm very lucky to have her as a mentor. But there I was watching this evolve. Do you see where I'm going with this? Because she was, I can be. And down there, as I approached graduation, which I graduated in 96, 95, 96 was when Martha McSally was flying her A-10. She became the first woman fighter pilot to actually fly in combat. She was also the first woman to command a fighter squadron. Both of these ladies are still in the Air Force, and they're both doing extremely well, and I suspect their careers will continue for quite some time. But I get a lot of attention for being the first woman Thunderbird, and it cracks me up because this stuff has been going on since the day I was born. There are so many stories out here, and I'm just highlighting a few. While I was at the academy, I was very blessed, a lot of serendipity. Mentors are important. And you know what? Sometimes I do think it's important to have someone who looks like you as a mentor. Mentors come in all shapes and sizes. I get that. But I was lucky to have Sue Ross. Sue Ross was my English teacher my freshman year at the academy. For whatever reason, she took a liking to me. I told her I was going to be a fighter pilot if they'd let me, kind of cocky and stuff. And she started talking to me, and she became my sponsor family, and for 4 years I would hang out at her house on the weekends and talk to her and her husband, who was also an Air Force pilot. Sue Ross graduated number one out of anything she ever did. She was number one out of pilot training when women couldn't pick fighters. She was distinguished graduate out of anything and everything she did. 2 years promotion early to major, 2 years promotion early to lieutenant colonel, 2 years promotion early to 06. You get the picture? I mean, what sweet serendipity that I have a role model like this. And she kept saying, you need to stick to that fighter pilot dream. And when the ban was lifted, she was the first person that said, you know what? You got to do this. I can't go back and do this. I wish I could. I believe in you. How can I help you stay focused and stay confident? And I will tell you, when you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, those ups and downs that you have, especially as a young gal, it was important to have Sue Ross around. I have that picture down there of the KC-10 refueling a B-52. Because remember, we had Desert Storm 1 in there as well. Now, Desert Storm 1 is what kicked off that battle in Congress, whether or not we should let women fly fighters, etc. So all this was going on as I was starting to go to the academy. I had met Sue Ross. And I love this picture because Sue Ross refueled her husband during Desert Storm 1, who was a B-52 pilot. So yeah, maybe she wasn't in the cockpit of the B-52, but please know, Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm 1, women were there. And women have been there since World War II. Side by side, hand in hand with our brother airmen. And I just think of that story, her refueling her husband, is awesome. And I didn't say earlier, but my husband's actually a Strike Eagle Wizzo, so I married my backseater. What can you say? He's the best Wizzo I know. If you ask him, he'll say, I'm the best fighter pilot he knows, which is a good answer in my house. Upon graduation there, it really was, time to walk the talk. I've been talking a lot since I was 5 years old. I'd had this dream, and part of me was nervous because I thought, man, if this doesn't work out at pilot training, what's going to happen? I didn't really have a backup plan. And I went in there, I said, you know what, I just want to graduate. I don't care what I fly. But I'll be honest, that wasn't really what was in my heart. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I remember with my class, 9803, there was like 30 or something of us that started. There was another gal, Kim Schiller, phenomenal. She went on to fly helicopters. Just a sweet lady. I don't know how else to put it. One of the nicest gals you'd ever meet. We were friends at the academy as well. I went off to T-38s and ended up obviously flying a Strike Eagle. But I remember the first day of class, they have you stand up and they introduce yourself and say what you want to fly. And everyone goes around. There's the, my name's, John Smith, and I'm going to fly the F-15. Or, my name's, Billy Bob, and I'm going to fly the F-16. And in my heart, I'm thinking, I'm going to stand up and say, I was just nervous. It was really weird. What if I stand up and say I want to be a fighter pilot? Because they hadn't had gals come through the pipeline at Columbus Air Force Base that had gone into fighters yet. And so I stood up and I said, well, my name's Nicole Ellingwood, and I'm going to fly the F-15E Strike Eagle. And, oh, boy, there was a lot of eyes rolling. 21-year-old boys, 21-year-old girls in the same room. What do you think? And it's a competitive atmosphere. And I sat down and I thought, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I sounded too arrogant. Maybe I alienated myself from my peers. But, as you know, it actually worked out, so that's good. T-37s, I failed my second check ride in T-37s. I don't want anyone to ever think that I am some sort of perfect pilot because I was a Thunderbird. I've never graduated number 1 out of anything I've done, ever. I'm always number 2, 3, or 4. So I graduated 4th eventually out of my pilot training class. There's some stuff online that says I was like number 1 in my class at the academy and number 1 out of pilot training. Not true. I was 124 out of the academy and number 4 out of pilot training, and I'm very proud of that. And I ended up obviously going over to the T-38. This gal also became very important to me, much in the same way that Kim Campbell was. This is my friend Tally Parham. So I had finished T-37s and started T-38s, and there was a gal that had been in T-38s. And sometimes you can fly T-37s at different bases, and they bring you for T-38 training and all this stuff. And Tally was awesome because she was just a cool cat. She was a class in front of me. And she was in T-38s, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's a girl flying T-38s. That's so cool. And she's going to be a fighter pilot. Well, she actually was chosen to go to pilot training by the South Carolina Air National Guard. So she enters pilot training knowing she's going to be an F-16 pilot at the very end. Whereas I'm active duty, I enter pilot training hoping to rank high enough to hopefully pick a fighter if there is one when our class graduates. But man, she was like my hero. I followed her around as if she had been a hardened F-16 pilot for 20 years. And she was only, 3 months in front of me. But her and I would sit, I remember, in Columbus, Mississippi, open a bottle of wine because, we were 21, and sit in our rocking chairs. And we were very manly, though, towards each other. You'd be like, yeah, you're going to be a fighter pilot, yeah. But we'd share some of those stories. Sometimes the sideways look you got from some of the instructors. Remember, cultural change is hard for everyone in any evolution and in any organization. And we, the women who were going through it, and I'm sure, Nadine, you can back me up, we had our own, changes we had to go through ourselves and things we had to put up with. But it's important to note that the gentlemen did too. And to just walk in and say, I expect you to change instantaneously because I'm here, I have arrived, is not nice, but it's also not realistic. And so, were there times that some of the instructors, I had one instructor in T-38s that wouldn't fly with me. He was an old fighter pilot, and he wasn't going to change his ways, and I was just grateful for the ones that would. And the vast majority would. But over time, everyone where we are today, let's put it this way, where we are today, it's changed a lot. You can't walk into a fighter squadron today without seeing at least one woman. And it's really not a big deal. We've been doing it since World War II, but we've been doing it since 1993. So it was a time of change, and it was nice to have Tally Parham, because we'd sit there in our rocking chairs drinking our wine, and she'd be like, yeah, this guy said this today, and I'd be like, yeah, I heard that one too, you know. It was kind of a very fighter pilot-like friendship, and she's still my friend to this day. And I was glad I had her to get through that. 1997, 12th of December, that's when I graduated from pilot training, and that's when my dad pinned my wings on. As you can see, I'm terribly excited. And I'm very excited because I was able to pick an F-15E Strike Eagle. So right off of pilot training, I headed off to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina and got to fly the plane, the second plane of my dreams, because, of course, the F-4 was retired. Big plane. I showed up there, and there had been a couple of women who'd flown before me in the Strike Eagle, Jeannie Flynn, who we mentioned before, another gal named Dawn Dunlap, who we'll get to in a minute. They were a lot taller than me, and I remember when I walked in, there was a little bit of a consternation while we were going through academic training and simulator training. They wanted to know if I was tall enough to taxi the plane and use the brakes, because they hadn't had somebody my height. And there was this conversation about, should we make her go taxi the plane around the base? I'm thinking, hey, that's just more, jet time for me, so whatever. It ended up not happening because, there was this, what do we do? And if we do it, we don't want to highlight her. You know how those things, go. So they match up pilots and Wizzos. Okay, so that was the first kind of thing coming in, and they're like, man, she's just too short. I'm 5'4", by the way, which is the minimum height to fly ejection seat aircraft, just so you know. So I am just, again, TLC, timing, luck, and circumstance. I just get by the skin of my teeth. And in the backseat of the Strike Eagle, you have a WISO, or Weapons Systems Officer. And what they do is they kind of draw names out of a hat and compare records, and they match up these crews, and you go through all of your F-15E training with the same crew. So there's consistency, and you learn together. If one person fails the sortie, the other person does. It's a total crew concept. And there's this big day after academics, before you start flying, where they have the crewing day, and it's like a party, and all the instructors get together, and you drink a beer and do a shot with your Wizzo or your pilot, and it's this big, exciting, thing. And they're pulling the names out, and they're like, Ellingwood and Sabrick. And her and I come walking up, and they're like, they didn't realize that they had put two girls together, and they're like, ooh, can we do that? I'll never forget the looks and just the chuckling. And they said, hey, we'll change you guys if you guys are uncomfortable. And her and I are like, you got to be kidding me. Of course, we're thrilled to fly together. And we were the first Air Force all-female fighter aircrew. And I'm very proud to share that distinction with Gina Sabrick, who is an amazing officer. She went on to get a whole bunch of air medals and a Distinguished Flying Cross in Operation Allied Force, which made her so distinguished they decided to send her to pilot training. And she is now an F-16 pilot and just returned recently from a tour in Iraq at Balad Air Base. So I'm proud to share the Strike Eagle history. When we went out on our solo, this is the time we first flew together, so I'm pretty happy after landing. This is her back there, just happy I probably didn't kill her. Because at that point, Wizzles are kind of just along for the ride, because it's just the solo part. We're not doing any, tactical employment. And they had news crews out there, and it's bad enough you got to come around the pattern. You're thinking, oh, I can't mess this up. And it's on your, fifth or sixth flight. So you solo pretty early without an instructor. So you're just like, I'm not going to mess this up. And there's these little media vans at the end of the runway. I'm like, just what I need, There's these media vans for both of us. But it actually turned out just fine. And slowly over time, it became, just more normal. We could battle it at each comment, or you can battle it at each look, or you can speak volumes without saying a word at all. And I think her and I, that's what we just did. Were we the best crew? No. Was I the best? She was a better Wizzo than I was a pilot. I was absolutely average, once again. But I made it through. Headed off, been in 3 operational fighter squadrons. I got over 2,000 hours in the F-15E and the F-16, 200 hours of combat time. I flew an Operation Deliberate Forge over Kosovo, which is different than Allied Force. And then I was able to fly Iraqi Freedom. I also did a tour in there as an Army liaison officer, or an ALO, with the 2nd Infantry Division, out at Camp Red Cloud in Korea. And that was one of the finest assignments of my career because it taught me about close air support from a soldier's perspective and from the ground battlefield. And it made me a lot better as an Air Force fighter pilot and as a close air support pilot when I returned to Iraq in 2005. Tons of stories there, like all of you I'm sure have, from your combat time or your time in the service. But my most proud moment happened on the 30th of January 2005. This is us getting ready to take off just a little bit before midnight. That's Pud Wilson, my Wizzo, and myself. Obviously, we've got all our combat gear on. By serendipity, we'd been selected to lead the only formation of fighter aircraft allowed over Baghdad on their historic election day. So here's the Air Force providing me this opportunity, to be a part of history, which was amazing. If you recall at the time, we moved a lot of the American forces to the outskirts on the ground, and they also removed the aircraft overhead. The idea being that they wanted to give the Iraqi people a feeling of ownership for their own security, a feeling of ownership on their big election day. So they allowed a two-ship over, so it was a two-ship of F-15Es. And I've told the story 1,000 times a night. I'll try to keep it kind of short, but we took off, the sun rose, we're over Baghdad. We're the only two-ship over Baghdad, and we're relatively low. We wanted them to know we're here, but there's not a lot of us here. And we carried weapons in the event something would happen. We knew where all the polling stations were. And our job was to check those polling stations and make sure there weren't, any bad guys, IEDs, ready for any kind of firefight. And the sun came up, and I'll be honest, the sun is just not more beautiful at sunrise than it is in the Middle East. It is huge and red and orange, and it's because of the sand and the dust in the air, but it's just this color that I just can't explain to you unless you see it with your own eyes. I've been over Baghdad a lot. It's a bustling city. But that morning, they had put the curfew on driving in people. So the sun comes up, and you're used to seeing people coming and going from prayer and market and all that, and there's nothing. It is like a ghost town. Baghdad's a huge city, too. It's a ghost town. And all of a sudden, it hits the time that the election, the polling places open, and there's nobody at the polling places. Now, this is from my soda straw perspective, and do I exaggerate? Probably slightly in my mind at the time, but I'm looking around going, where are you people? I mean, we've been fighting, we've lost American lives on the ground, and nobody is out there. And I ended up in the northeast corner near Sadr City, and we were just looking around with a sniper pod. And I see this lone guy walking down the street. And I'm thinking, I know what you're doing. You are going to go blow up a polling station because you're by yourself. You've probably got some stuff strapped underneath there. I feel guilty saying that, but that was the way that you have to kind of be trained to think. So we started tracking him in the targeting pod. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, this lone man walking down the street started gathering people behind him. People started coming out of their houses, and I kind of saw this develop in front of my own eyes. And I call him the Pied Piper of Sadr City now because he was actually going to a polling station to vote. He was the first guy that said, you know what, I'm going to walk out on this street and risk my life to do something that people around the world, including Americans, take for granted all too often, and I'm going to go vote. And before that sortie ended that day with Pud and I, there were lines, it seemed miles long, people standing single file, calmly, orderly, risking their lives to vote. And I think that the Air Force let me be a part of that. Is pretty amazing, and I'll never forget it. And it was a long sortie, and guys wear what are called skull caps. They're on their short hair. They put this cloth that prevents the helmet from getting these burns and these rubs and these hot spots. Well, it doesn't really work well with girl hair, so after the mission, I had all these hot spots because I didn't want to come off headset in case something happened. So this is on our way back to base, and I took off my helmet. And Pud was yelling at me, what are you doing, fixing your hair? And I could hear him from the back. So I turned around, and he actually had taken a picture. So that was a pretty historic day for Pud Wilson and I and for the Air Force and for the Iraqis. Great girlfriend of mine over here, Shaka Fujimoto. Oh, my gosh, 5'4", 90 pounds soaking wet. I kid you not. She's the tiniest thing you've ever seen. And she was a brand-new wingman. I was on my third tour. I was a flight commander instructor pilot. And we got to go out while we were deployed to the USS Harry Truman. For me, kind of a sad event. I had acted as mission commander in the recovery of 2 downed F-18s and brought some of their brothers home back to the ship, so they wanted to fly me out there. They said, we have room for one more. Ironically, they only had female berthing open, so I said, well, I guess that means my friend, Jen is going. And so we went out there to the Harry Truman, which was really gracious of the Navy, and what our sailors do on those aircraft carriers is unbelievable. If you ever get a chance to do it or watch it on Discovery Channel, do, because it's just inspiring. But my point here is Jen flew on my wing a couple times because they would always put an experienced flight lead with an inexperienced wingman. And I'll never forget one night we were fully loaded. We took off 80,000 pounds gross weight. We are stacked as much as a Strike Eagle can be with air-to-ground munitions. We got gentlemen in both of our back seats. She's my wingman. It is nighttime, awful thunderstorms. We're on NVGs. The clouds are going up to 40,000 feet. The tanker pilots are awesome, trying to do the best they can to avoid this weather. You get up to 40,000 feet in a fully loaded Strike Eagle, and you literally have to go into min-afterburner in order to stay on the boom, okay? So the gas is coming in just a little bit faster than you're putting those dinosaurs, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't get this gas. And it was the most difficult sortie I'd ever been on, and it was one of her first. And she did awesome. We took our time. Her voice, every time she keyed the mic, she sounded like she knew what she was doing. She was confident, And what was funny is, the point of this story is that other tankers will come up behind you, and they'll stack in formation, a mile, 3 miles back, and they'll wait their turn. So we had some Navy F-18s behind us, or maybe some, British aircraft or whatever, waiting their turn to get on the tanker. And when there are aircraft on a tanker, the code phrase for that is chicks in tow. This is not a joke. So we've got this KC-10 pilot who happened to be a woman, 2 F-15E women flying and trying our darndest in this thunderstorm to get gas, and all of a sudden these male F-18 guys check in, and the KC-10 lady pilot, who I don't know to this day, but bless her heart, she's like, yeah, negative Navy 1-2, hold 1 mile back, chicks in tow. And she just started laughing on the radio, and then Jen and I started laughing, and our Wizzos started saying, just keying the mic, being like, there's guys in this formation, Yeah. And so there really were chicks in tow that day, and it was just a good story. And I'll always remember Jen. She just had her second child last week, and she is returning to fly the F-15E Strike Eagle in July of next year, which I just found out Monday is the same class I'll be in, so the girls shall rejoin here soon. So why would a fighter pilot trade in a Strike Eagle for flying loops to music? That's a fabulous question. After all that I had seen in Iraq, the teamwork, the professionalism, the American people, the true stories of heroism and hard work and dedication and sacrifice, I thought, what better way would there be to share the Air Force story? And when I applied to the Thunderbirds, I had absolutely no idea. This is sincere. First of all, it was my husband's suggestion. I did it 3 days before the application deadline. And I had no idea that they hadn't had a woman before. Didn't even occur to me, one, because women have been flying since 93. You got to be kidding me. The Air Force Thunderbirds hadn't had a woman. And two, it was just operations as normal. I mean, all the guys who were my age who would be on the team, they had always flown with women too. You see what I'm saying? So we didn't think it was that big of a deal. Archivally, I would eventually find out I was the 15th woman over a 5-year period to apply to the team. People often say, well, because you made it, you must have been the first one that applied. Doesn't matter to me either way. I did the best I could, but that's the actual numbers because people kept hounding me about that. So I was the 15th woman over a 5-year period. I got to fly right wing. All of these guys are phenomenal. They treated me with the utmost of respect. Every single one of them are my friends. I talk with them daily on email. This poor guy, Ed Casey, he was the opposing solo the first year. He now is my cubicle mate over at Air Force International Affairs, so he can't get rid of me. And I love this picture because when we would line up before a show, if you've ever seen it, you stand here and they announce you and they do all this, hoopla stuff. But we're always joking and talking with each other. And anytime we'd line up before the mic started, this guy, the jokester, Brian Farah, he would always say, under his breath, he'd go, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things is not the same. And we had fun with it. They realized that there was a lot of extra media attention, but they realized that it was good for the Air Force, that it was sharing 20% and putting a visible face on 20% of our Air Force. They trusted me. He was my instructor pilot, Steve Horton. Scotty Zamzow was my yin and yang. He was the left wingman, I was the right. If we weren't in perfect sync, the whole formation looked off. And Colonel Robbins put up with me. Bless his heart. He goes by Hollywood. Perfect Thunderbird 1. Most difficult thing for me to do are in these two pictures down here. Number 3 is always in the sandwich. Number 1 is always correct, no matter what he does. He's your attitude indicator. And that's true. He's everything, because when you're flying so close, you don't have a concept of necessarily where the horizon is. You're not looking through your HUD. You're not looking at your instruments. So I mean that jokingly and seriously. Number 2 has a little bit of movement under here. We're pulling at 4 Gs to each other. My goal is to not move as number 2 bobbles up and down, which he needs to, because if I unload, I kill my friend Steve Horton, who I like a lot. So number 3 is always in the middle of everything. 1, 2, 3. I don't think I figured out how to fly this correctly until probably really nicely until the start of my second year. So Thunderbird pilots aren't perfect. We all have our Achilles heel, and for me, it would be the trail formation during training season, and it would be this for my entire first show season. And eventually, and I put the good pictures in there, I figured it out, because these guys helped me. They trained me. So I kind of became a role model without knowing it. The crowds and the people would just be freaked out that there was a gal flying, and sometimes I got a little defensive. I'm like, of course there's women flying. You know, women have been flying since 1993 in fighters, and I finally realized one day I'm going about this all wrong. This is an opportunity to educate, and in fact, women have been flying fighters since World War II. So instead of being slightly defensive about it, I came to realize that I had an opportunity right here in this moment of time to share more or an integral part of the Air Force story. And it's here where I realized that it means something for young people to see someone who looks like them succeeding. And I was very proud to be a part of that, and I am proud to be a part of that. So I would have the privilege of coming across, for the first time in my life, real-life WASP. Right? Since I was, 12 years old, I wanted to meet these gals who'd kept me motivated through so much. And as a Thunderbird, the WASP come out of the woodwork. They're at every air show. They love that stuff. And, because they're fighter pilots and bomber pilots and transport pilots. And they always wore these beautiful blue scarves. You could see them on the autograph line flapping in the wind. Gorgeous, beautiful women, graceful beyond all get out, and just so humble. And this is Betty Blake. Betty Blake is a great friend of mine to this day. She was the first woman to fly a fighter. She flew P-51 Mustangs. How cool is that? She flew P-51 Mustangs. If I had been a fighter pilot in World War II, I'd want to fly the P-51. This is her and I meeting for the first time at my very first air show at Luke. You'll note that the two fighter pilots are both drinking. I am a beer girl. She is a gin and tonic girl. I had to stop drinking at a certain time because I'm a Thunderbird and I had to go home to get ready for the air show the next day. And I was walking away from the bar, and she goes, "Hey, Thunderbird." I mean, like that. And I'm looking at her, and she goes, "Where are you going?" I said, "Oh, Betty, I got to get going. You hold up the bar for me." And she goes, "What kind of fighter pilot are you?" Oh, bless her heart. And I just got to meet so many lovely ladies. Pearl Judd's just a doll. Oh, all of them. And I had the opportunity, following my Thunderbird tour, to do something special as a White House Fellow. And my first month as a White House Fellow, I got asked to come speak at the WASP reunion, their final reunion in Texas. What a privilege. I thought, why do they want me to come speak? And I thought, I was really nervous. And I went and I gave my speech, and of course we all ended up at the bar. Literally, we were at the bar till midnight. I couldn't believe these ladies in their 80s and early 90s are just holding it down. And they're talking about how maybe their story had been forgotten. And there was a wonderful WASP called Deanie Parrish and her daughter Nancy Parrish, who have an organization called Wings Across America. WingsAcrossAmerica.org is a phenomenal website. They've worked their lives to get this website up to speed. All this information, oral histories, etc. And Deanie was talking to me, feisty as ever, just a wonderful pilot. She said, the Tuskegee Airmen got national recognition, and I think the only way for our story to be told, which is all the WASP really care about, is that people know. They don't care about a medal. They don't care about recognition in the accolade kind of way. They care about an education of America, of what they did. Because when they were disbanded, their records were signed and sealed classified, not to be reopened until the 1970s. So when the history books of World War II were being written, they were forgotten. That's why they're not in it. And that's not okay. I think all of you agree with that. So Deanie Parrish got me thinking. I went to their website. I went back to this White House Fellowship. This is my class. 14 fellows, 10 civilian, 4 military. We're standing here with Colin Powell. That's me. right next to Colin Powell. He's cool. And I couldn't shake what Deanie Parrish said. And I went to their website. Man, they put years, and they've been writing letters and trying for recognition. And I realized I am in a place to maybe make this happen. And I talked to my husband about it, and I tossed and turned for like a month or two. And in December, I started putting pen to paper, and I come up with these ideas and started shopping them around. And no one was listening on Capitol Hill, and I didn't know what was wrong. And I hadn't told any of my classmates. Colin Powell came to talk, and I was trying to be all kind of cool with him. I'm like, hey, big ideas. How do you take something that's a big idea and make it happen, I was not being very specific. And he said, great ideas need great champions. And I realized I wasn't being very strategic in how I went about trying to garner support through the Senate or the Congress. And I hadn't been very strategic in my presentation. Luckily, there's a great gal named Sarita James, who is a McKinsey consultant. She also happened to invent voice recognition software when she was 18, but that's another story. And she worked with Mother Teresa in Calcutta. This is not a joke. She is my hero, and I wish you could all meet her. She says, why don't I look at your presentation? She helps me redo it. She's very nice. She's like, that's a real great military briefing. You get 2 minutes with them. And if you can't nail it in the first 30 seconds, you're done. And you also need to draft the bill. I thought, draft the bill? I don't know how to draft a bill. She goes, look, you need to walk in there and in 2 minutes tell them why the WASP are important and hand them the bill and say, I did all the work for you, now sign it. And I was like, she's like 60 pounds soaking wet. I'm like, yes, Sarita, yes. She would have been a great fighter pilot. And so Sarita and I went about drafting the bill, and I spent a lot of time at the Library of Congress and met up with some fabulous ladies. Lieutenant Colonel Roxy Dolphin, United States Army, and Miss Angie Knappenberger, United States Navy. They've never gotten recognition or publicly applauded for anything they did with this bill, and so today I'm doing it for them. Senator Hutchinson, that's her aide, and she is Senator Mikulski's aide. Senator Hutchinson and Senator Mikulski decided to co-champion the bill in a bipartisan way. All of the original signers are all of the women senators. And let's be honest, Deanie Parrish and Nancy Paris had an idea. They had all the ammunition. I had the gun in the right place to shoot, and these gals are the ones that every day for 10 months walked the halls, knocked on doors, and forced the signatures. They didn't know me. They'd never met a WASP. They just believed. And so to Roxy Dolphin and Angie Knappenberger, they'll be my sisters forever. And it's kind of a joint operation there, Army, Air Force, Navy. I'm just missing a Marine. And July 1st, 1999. So September is when I got the idea from Deanie Parrish. Less than a year later, we had it signed into public law, which is kind of a record. A lot of people helped out. I know there's people in this audience that helped out, calling and writing and all of that. But there's Bea Haydu and Elaine Harmon and Lorraine Rogers, myself, Wendy Wasik, Kara Sandiford, tanker pilots, Don Dunlap, Bobby Dorenbos, former White House fellows and good friends of mine. That was a wonderful day. A lot of hard work. And what's beautiful is in 1977, Bea was the head of the WASP organization. And when that bill was signed into law to give them veteran status, she wasn't invited. We found out approximately 1 day prior that this was happening. Roxy Dolphin hunted down Bea Haydu, who was flying in a powder puff derby. She still flies. And she said, I'll be up there. And she flew her little buns up, and she made it to her signing, by God, on behalf of all of her sisters, and that's a pretty cool thing. But all of us there, it wasn't closing the loop like people say. It was continuum. Don Dunlap and Bobby Dorenbos, who I pointed out, both White House fellows before me. Don Dunlap's the first woman to fly the F-22. She's currently the Vice Wing Commander out at Edwards Air Force Base. Bobby Dorenbos was one of the first formations of F-16s that was scrambled on September 11th, both still serving their country. My friend Kim Campbell, my best buddy since I was 12 years old. We talked about her earlier. You saw us with our awful prom dresses and 80s hair. This is her as a bona fide combat veteran. She had been shot up over Baghdad. She lost all hydraulic power, had to fly the A-10 in manual reversion. Everything says you can't land an A-10 in manual reversion. It hadn't been done successfully before until Kim Campbell brought her plane home and survived, and she received the Distinguished Flying Cross, and I'm so proud to have been her friend for 23 years. She's 2 below the zone to lieutenant colonel, and I'm certain I will be pouring her coffee someday. She had a lovely little boy, but she's now back in the cockpit flying A-10s out in Arizona. My friend Teresa Weems, who's a cubicle mate of mine, she says, I'm just a tanker pilot. I said, Teresa, I've been there at 40,000 feet in a thunderstorm on NVGs going where no tanker pilot should ever want, to come get me, and you guys have come for me. Tell me your story. 2.5 hours later, come to find out, she took in and drug in the first flight of bombers that went into Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001. She also was the primary refueling aircraft over Mazar-e-Sharif the day that it fell and the Taliban were put out. I'd say that's pretty special, but even if I tell her today it's a big deal, she says, it's not a big deal. I love this gal. Jules Grundle. Graduates number 1 out of her pilot training class, takes a helicopter to be with her husband. Could have been a fighter pilot, wouldn't trade it for the world. She has one of the most noble and honorable missions, combat search and rescue. In the HH-60, she's recovered plenty of sometimes deceased, sometimes alive, sometimes throwing whatever body parts you can into her helicopter so that she can get those people out of there before, something worse happens and the enemy, takes those remains and does something bad with them for propaganda. I think the adults in the audience know what I'm talking about. And she says, no, I don't really do anything that special. You know what's interesting? The Air Force has really bulked up helping out the Army. And so she pilots these HH-60s with Army Special Forces, Army Rangers on it,